I think I've said way too often that as we look at this mammoth increase in the amount of crude oil that we're moving on the rails, it raises really three areas that we need to concentrate on. Number one, the prevention of derailments. In this, a room much like this, we had a long conversation with a number of railroad officials on how we could provide better support for prevention of derailments. The second issue is really minimizing and mitigating the consequences of a derailment. In that case, we have a long discussion about tank cars and what should those tank cars look like? How should we classify the nature and the characteristics of the crude that's going into the tank cars? What do we need to do in terms of speed and routing to prevent catastrophic results if we have a derailment? And so those are all critically important, but as a former Attorney General who worked very closely during my tenure, not only with Fire Marshal Service, which was under the jurisdiction of the Attorney General, but the entire fire service in the state of North Dakota, whether it's volunteers like Tim here, who's the chief of the Volunteer Fire Department in Casselton, North Dakota. I might mention my dad was chief for about 30 years in Matador, North Dakota, so I know it can be a thankless job getting those guys to show up and do the training, but I know you guys do it well, and that's a huge part of our first response effort, especially in rural communities. And I know we have someone here from FEMA who we're going to have broader conversations. But I think that if we are going to continue what we think is this energy renaissance that has been so critical and so important to America's future, we need to figure out safety of the transport of this material. And so, you know, just to give you some idea on kind of how quickly this has become an issue, and not to disagree with the chairman on numbers, but we think there's been a 6,000% increase over 5 years of the amount of oil that is moving on the rails. And I think that has raised questions not only in our state but across the country. I get many op-ed pieces, many letters to the editor, many articles from places all over this country that are seeing these key trains or these unit trains of oil saying, what do you want us to do? Or should we allow this in our community? And it has really raised the issue of legitimate discussion about how we continue this energy renaissance, how we continue the transportation of this product, but do it in such a way that we have broad-based support. And to me, one of the first things that we need to focus on is preparation of our first responders, for really two reasons. Number one, it'll mitigate the loss of life and property in our communities and in our rural areas, wherever these derailments take place. But equally important, it will minimize the loss of life of our first responders. And I think we have come, I don't think in this country take it for granted, but occasionally we just think, oh, the firefighters will show up and they will take care of the problem. And I think sometimes we don't understand the risk that's inherent with that commitment to the public safety. And I think we saw that in Casselton with the Casselton Volunteer Fire Department, and we're so proud of what Chief McLean has done in our state, but he also, I think, has an experience that a lot of other folks haven't had. I'm going to put up the and what you can't see from this is you can't see the height of that explosion. And if I could show you the train underneath, it would just be a little line underneath that. In fact, that was so tall that the chief called FAA and said, we have a problem with airspace over Casselton. And so I think when you look at that, I think any first responder, any person who's been trained would say, what do you do with that? And there's the good news, if there's any good news out of this. The good news is there is, that's out in the middle of a field. And the spill eventually ended up in a ditch because the ground was frozen, that some of the environmental impacts of that spill were mitigated as well. But there isn't anyone who doesn't look at that and say, what happens if that was in my community? What would we do? And so today, I'm hoping that we will continue this discussion with federal officials and industry officials on how we can better prepare our communities, how we can better prepare our first responders. And I have to say, I haven't I haven't had any conversations with anyone in the railroad industry where they haven't talked about first responders, where they don't understand and appreciate the commitment that's out there. And I think as we look forward, and we've spent a lot of time with DOT on a couple of the derailment and mitigation issues, and I think it's only appropriate that FEMA's here as a important and significant federal partner in providing that umbrella of training. You know, and no one likes to think like this, but that could have, it didn't have to be a derailment. That could be an act of terrorism. And we all know that one of the things, we want to prevent those as much as what we can, and we're working to prevent any kind of event, but we also need to have the ability to appropriately respond. So I'm looking forward to this discussion, and I'm looking forward to the fact that this won't be the only discussion we have on this. They will, in fact, be looking at follow-through and follow-up, and that we make this part of the discussion as it relates to this energy renaissance.